Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. Thank you, Oliver, for the invitation, and thanks you for organizing the seminar. So my name is Dario Sansone. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Exeter Business School in the Economic Department. And today I'll present a joint project with IDSAI from Australia, in which we use machine learning to create an early warning system for welfare recipients. The idea is for me to present for 40-45 minutes and then to have the Q&A at the end. And there should also be tea and coffee. Thank you for that. And so I'm also happy to stay a bit longer if you want to discuss it further. So if you have any substantial question, feel free to ask them at the end once we stop the recording. So you don't have to be worried. You don't have to worry about asking stupid questions. And but if anything is not clear, if you have any clarifying question, if I take some economic concept for granted, feel free to interrupt me at any point during the presentation. So let me start by motivating this project. So the main focus is on income support payment, which are payments used by governments all over around the world to provide a minimum standard of living to all its residents and citizens. And in theory, this is a great idea because it provides a safety net for everyone, especially in the short run. The issue is when people start relying on these payments in the long run, because that can cause issues for individuals and for governments. Especially for individuals, you may end up with long-term economic disadvantage and social exclusion. It can also lead to large costs for society, for government budgets, and also lead to lower labor market participation, and therefore lower economic output. Then, I don't love the term welfare culture, but there is this risk that there may be some intergenerational transmission, that children whose parents relied on income support payments, they may also end up relying on these payments when they become adults. And we know that there are a lot of programs which are effective at helping these individuals, especially labor market activation programs and intervention by social workers and case workers, especially when these interventions are targeted towards specific individuals and are implemented early on before it's too late to help these individuals. But the main step is to first identify individuals who are at risk of relying for too long on this kind of income support payment. And what governments and social workers are doing right now is to use just simple profiling tools or case workers' individual evaluation or some actuarial models. What we hope to propose is to use some machine learning tools using available administrative data, which are already high quality, high intensity, and available to case workers. So it's just using information which is already there at no extra cost with these additional algorithms. And what we hope is that by using these algorithms, we may be able to predict more precisely which people are more at risk of relying on income support payments in the long run. And for most of the talk, I will focus only on any kind of income payment, income support payment. Then, since economists are kind of obsessed with long-term unemployment, we will also show you some results specifically on long-term unemployment receipt and long-term dependency on these benefits. And I think this is quite interesting because case workers in Australia who help unemployed people are usually working in private agency, and this agency may have the tendency not to help long-term unemployment benefits recipients because they may be too hard to help them. And so using these algorithms may force them in a way to help these individuals because they're identified as at risk. Now you may wonder why Australia is interesting in this case. Even if you're not Australian, I think this is quite interesting because Australia is one of the most targeted welfare systems in the world, which means that when we try to predict the long-term income dependency, we are essentially predicting long-term poverty, long-term vulnerability. And in a way, that's what policymakers care about. We want to reduce poverty, and we want to help people who are at risk of falling below the poverty line. And the other reason why Australia is interesting is that the government is currently spending millions of dollars, Australian dollars, but it's still a lot of money, in coming up with new profiling tools, in trying to identify individuals who are more at risk of relying on welfare support over the long run. And, yes, now, with this audience, some of you may ask, isn't it obvious that machine learning is going to be better? Isn't machine learning always doing better? And actually, at least in economics, but also in other social sciences, there are a lot of examples in which machine learning does not outperform simple models. And there may be a variety of reasons. The most obvious one is that some economists may apply this methodology just because now it's fashionable to apply them, even if the data set, the application is not ideal for these techniques. For instance, using machine learning with a data set which only includes a few hundred observations may not work out well, because machine learning works better when you have millions of observations, when you have very large data set. Otherwise, you cannot disentangle noise from signal. The other reason why these algorithms may fail to outperform other models is that there may be some unobservable characteristics which are driving your outcome of interest. For instance, in one paper that I wrote with David McKenzie from the World Bank, we were trying to predict entrepreneurial success. And we actually found that machine learning, in that case, even if we had a very large data set, probably the largest data set on business competition in the world, still we did not substantially improve compared to simple model. And that's because entrepreneurial success is often due to your connections, your entrepreneurial ability, even some luck. And all these factors are usually unobservable. And for that reason, using machine learning in this context may not work well. And finally, if the underlying relationship between two variables is linear, then allowing for flexible functional form will not substantially improve predictions, because the relationship is truly linear. It's not quadratic, polynomial, or so on. So what we actually find is that in this specific case, actually machine learning does perform better compared to simpler models such as OLS models, but even some more sophisticated heuristic model, or even better than what the governments are currently doing. And compared to the best of these alternative models, our machine learning algorithms increase R squared by 14 percentage points, which is quite substantial if you think that this intervention is essentially zero cost. You are just exploiting data which is already there, which is already available to governments, and it's already available to case workers. They already have access to all this information. It's just a matter of using them efficiently. Indeed, our algorithms are able to identify individuals who are more at risk of accumulating higher welfare costs. So if the governments are able to support them, they may substantially reduce these government expenditures. And so because all of this, because more and more countries are having access to this administrative data, our hope is that this will also be used as a blueprint for other countries. So far, so good? Everything clear? Great. So as I said, we use administrative data from Australia. These are high frequency in the sense that they're updated every 2 weeks with new information. And the cool thing is that we don't have only low-income people who rely on welfare support. Everyone who receives any kind of payment from the government for instance, child benefits, also is included in this data. So you have a wide range of a wide section of the Australian population. It's not the whole population, but it is a large fraction of it. Again, it's not only low-income people. And because it's mean tested, a lot of these payments you have to complete to fill out a lot of paperwork, up to 30 pages, which is not ideal for people who have to fill out this paperwork, but it's a lot of information for us, which we end up with hundreds of possible inputs, even thousands once you start to include interaction terms. And all this data are high quality in the sense that the information is cross-checked, cross-validated with the Australian Tax Office. So we are quite sure about the reliability of this information. And again, I want to emphasize, I think it's one of the coolest things about this data is that a caseworker, somebody working in a job placement office already has access to all this data. It's a matter of using them efficiently. And there is also some evidence that administrative data may be a good proxy for behavioral information, behavioral data. And one could also argue that there may be fewer ethical concerns and privacy concerns on using administrative data instead of collecting new survey data or asking for new information, since these are already there. You are not collecting new information. Now, because of time, I will focus most of my talk on supervised machine learning, on trying to predict welfare dependency. In the paper, we also have a section on unsupervised machine learning, in which essentially we see which people are at risk of welfare dependency, and then we divide them into different subgroups. And the idea is that we want to acknowledge that this is a multidimensional issue. People may be at risk for different reasons, so it's worth dividing them into different subgroups. It's also helpful for caseworkers because then they may target different subgroups in different ways. And it also can be a complement to randomized control trials. Then you can run some RCTs with different subgroups and see which intervention works better for each subgroup. Because, for instance, indigenous people who are unemployed for a long period of time may require different intervention compared to people who have certain disabilities. And so you don't want to have one size fits all interventions. I'm also going to skip over the literature review just to say that this is a booming literature, at least in economics. And it has been used in a lot of applications. A lot of them are quite interesting. Our contribution to this literature is to also apply these algorithms to welfare dependency prediction. And I think some of the advantages of using these methods is that we are only predicting this long-term welfare dependency using short-term variables. So that way we allow caseworkers to identify people at risk and to intervene as soon as possible. Because the longer you wait, the longer is the cost for these interventions. And also, caseworkers usually have a lot of applicants for each of them. And so using this screening device may save also caseworkers some time and so reduce their workload. So instead of spending time screening applicants, they may spend more time actually with the welfare recipients in order to help them. And as I mentioned, it may also force this agency to help people who are at risk, even if it's more expensive to help them, it's more complicated to help them, especially if they are at risk of long-term unemployment. And I'm not asking caseworkers to learn machine learning. I think it's quite feasible to just provide this prediction in a user-friendly way to all social workers and allow them to match that with their, merge that with their expertise, and then to use that however they wanted. And again, I want to stress that this is a very low-cost intervention. It's just using data already there. And obviously, there is a large literature also on this welfare dependency, both in economics and outside economics. My co-author has written a very good review on the paper, but I'm going to skip that for now. I think I said essentially everything I want to say about the Australian background. Just to say that this kind of income support payments are the standard income support payments that you see in any advanced economies. It's not only unemployment benefits, it's also payments for students, for parents, people with disability, people are caring for other older parents and so on, and also older people. All these payments are usually mean tested. That's why we collect a lot of information, and they are received by 1/4 of the Australian population. In our data, we also have other individuals who do not receive this kind of income support, but who are in contact with the social security system for other kind of support, such as maternity leave, child support, child tax benefits, but also rent assistance, and so on. And the key point is that because we also have these individuals, we don't only have low-income people. So there is more variety in this data set, which is arguably better compared to other administrative data or survey data, which focus only on the first group. And as I mentioned, the Australian government is spending a lot of money trying to come up with new profiling tools and techniques. And I think the most popular one for now is this try, test, and learn, in which they're focusing on young carers, young parents, and students who receive certain kind of income support. Now, they do that also for policy reasons because they want to particularly help these kind of peoples, but we will try to estimate a model which uses only these indicators and to compare these actuarial models with other models and with machine learning to see what is the cost in terms of predictive accuracy of focusing only on this subpopulation compared to using machine learning or other techniques. Data, as I said, are administrative data. These are people age 15 or above. And as I mentioned, these are very high frequency data. People have to update the information every 2 weeks. And everyone has to fill out a lot of paperwork when they apply for this support. Which means that, again, we have a lot of inputs, a lot of information available in this dataset. We are focusing on people who can work, essentially, so between age 15 and 66. All our inputs will be computed using data from 2014. And we will look at welfare dependency between 2015 and 2018. So we are focusing on a period which is, from a macroeconomic perspective, relatively stable. And now the tricky part is that these data are stored in a government server, which is not the most powerful server available to researchers. And essentially every 1 or 2 weeks, they also reset the server, which means that you cannot run an algorithm for a month because then they will, after 2 weeks, they will drop it. And so you will lose all your work. So what we end up doing is to select one random 1% sample of this population, because that's the only way we could run these algorithms on this server. But obviously, potentially you could get even better results by using larger sample with more powerful servers. And I have to acknowledge that my co-authors have to wake up in the middle of the night to move the mouse, otherwise the server also stops working. So I appreciate that she's done a lot of work to run these algorithms, because every 12 hours, otherwise it stops. Anyway, our outcome variable is we compute welfare dependency in the long run. So we compute how many days each individual has received income support divide between 2015 and 2018, divided by the number of days in that period. So we decided to focus on a 4-year period because this is consistent with other previous studies, it's consistent with how governments define welfare dependency. And I thought it was a good compromise in order to be long enough to capture long-term welfare dependency, but also short enough that we take into account that people may have different needs during the life cycle. And arguably, this is a better measure of severe form of economic disadvantage compared to survey data, which only use information at one point in time on whether or not you have to receive this kind of income support. Now, a lot of people in our data, as I mentioned, don't have access, don't apply for income support payments. And so obviously there is a large fraction of people who never receive this kind of income support payments. There is then some people who always receive income support payments, but even between 0 and 1, there is some variability. So there are some, yes.
Clarifying question.
Yes.
So those who never apply, do they still fill in this high frequency data that you are then exploiting in your algorithm or not? So those people that are always on 0, for example.
I should double check with my court, but my understanding is that since these are cross-checked with the tax office,
You still have to, even though they're not interested in the...
I mean, maybe they don't have to do it, but in the system, we always have for any kind of income support, or even if it's not, even for child benefits, even if it's not counted as income support, we always know at which time you start receiving and which time you stop receiving any kind of support. So you have to update when you receive these payments, but not before or after.
And the covariance, like you said, it's means tested, right? So all these covariants are always available, high frequency.
Yes, they're always available. And we also know indeed whether people move across places and if they change jobs and so on. And as I mentioned, we're also going to, I'm also going to show you long-term unemployment benefits. And in this case, obviously there are more people who never receive income, unemployment benefits, but there's still some variability between 0 and 1, and also some people always receive some kind of unemployment benefits for 4 years. So the inputs variable are computed using data from 2014. These are standard variables that you expect in administrative data. I have demographic variables, some income information, some where you lived, your education, your wealth, but also some marital status information and some health variables. The cool thing is that this is a panel data, and since I have this information, which is high frequency, we can also compute, yes.
So just a question, I noticed there wasn't criminal conviction history in that, and my understanding is that's usually a determinant quite heavily of persistent unemployment. Is that a missing variable or?
Good point, I have to check, I think it's not there. But yeah, I can check because I think in the US, probably by law, in some cases you cannot include, but I have to check in Australia if it's the same. Yes.
Sorry, just to expand on Jonathan's point. So earlier, I think there was a suggestion that there were 1,800 different data points for each person who filled out the questionnaire. So this is clearly not 1,800, but were they down selected automatically, or was that using some sort of experts' input to choose most, was it through data analysis that you arrived at the important factors, or was it through input from a human expert?
So I will show the result also for some heuristic expert models, but when we the inputs that we put in the machine learning is essentially everything that is available in the data set. Because in a way, that's the beauty of this algorithm. You don't make the decision, you let the algorithm decide everything. And we also include the redundant variables. In some cases, we have the categorical variable and then one dummy for each category, because that way we can allow the algorithm to choose how to include each variable. But the criminal one is a good point. I will double check.
Is indigenous status is that a race variable for Australia, or is that something else?
If I remember well, it's a separate variable. There is a specific category for indigenous people. Specific question.
Okay. So explicitly race isn't there. It's kind of a confound.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, in this country, in Australia, and other places, race will be correlated with a number of these things. You probably have it. So it's a, but it's not used, then it will be a confounding variable, right?
Yes, but I mean, the algorithm includes both indigenous status, also where you come from if you're an immigrant, and other. I think we also have standard race category with white, black, and so on. But I can also show you what's the predictive power of indigenous status, what happens if we include it or we exclude it. But if that doesn't answer, we can talk a bit more. But as I was saying, the good things about having a panel data set is that we can measure both the intensity, the variability, and the instability of certain variables. For instance, I know whether or not you change job, but I also know how many times you change jobs, how many times you move from one place to the others. And these may be potentially some important predictors. If you move in 1 year 5 times, that's an important indicator. And in some cases, they may also be good proxies for behavioral traits. For instance, if payments are stopped because you forgot to fill out some forms, that may also be a proxy for some behavioral or non-cognitive skills. Then, so before showing the machine learning result, I will show you some standard benchmark. The most classical benchmark is just a regression model with one constant, where we are predicting the share of time people receive income support payments in 4 years. Then I will also show you the predictive power of sex, education, age. And then you may also ask, what is the predictive power of past income support? Whether or not you receive this kind of payments in the past, how much is going to predict receiving payments in the future? And whether or not it matters where you receive different kind of payments. Then we use this heuristic model, this expert model. We just run a model with variables which are used by economists when explaining economic behavior, are the standard variable that you will think of. Then we augment this model with past income support history, and we also include the detailed geographical information. That's because if you know about the literature by Chetty and Kortos, there's a big push, big argument for neighborhood characteristics affecting long-term outcomes. And then we cannot perfectly estimate what the Australian government is doing with their try, test, and learn model, but we try to proxy that as best as we can, using these indicators for being a younger students receiving a certain kind of support and a young parent. And then we just put everything that we know from this data set in these machine learning algorithms. And since we only have a 1% random sample of the population, once you start including interaction terms, you may end up with thousands of potential inputs. So obviously running OLS is not feasible. And that's where machine learning really performs better. Now, which method to use? Everyone has their favorite machine learning algorithms. Every referee always has to do one algorithm instead of the other. We started with 3 algorithms: lasso, support vector regression, and boosting. And the reasoning is that there are different methods and they provide different level of flexibility and interpretability. So lasso, I usually always present it because it's very easy to explain to economists, which are very familiar with OLS. This is just a penalized OLS regression. And the coefficient can be easily interpreted. Support vector regression, instead, it's more of a black box. It's more difficult to interpret what's going on inside the algorithms, but it's very flexible. It can really fix any kind of functional form. And then boosting, it's a tree-based algorithms, and it can also allow for a lot of interactions among the inputs. Now, I don't think I need to go over the details with this audience, but just to say, as usual, we have a training sample with 80% of the data, which we use to calibrate and estimate our models. Then we have a holdout sample, which we do not touch until the end, where we estimate our auto sample predictions. And that's what I will show you in the tables. Then there is also some evidence that combining different algorithms may lead to even superior performance. So I will also show you an ensemble algorithm in which we merge lasso, support vector regression, and boosting predictions all together. So what we get? Now, obviously, the R² of a model with only a constant is 0%, but even sex, age, education, they have relatively low predictive power. So the R² is quite low, it's below 20%. Income support history is quite powerful instead. If you receive income support payment in the past, it's a powerful predictor for whether or not you will receive income support payments for a long time in the future. So even just a model, a simple model with this dumb indicator could achieve very high predictive power, which is something to keep in mind. Surprisingly, instead, when we estimate our heuristic model, the predictive power is quite low. And as you see from model 7, adding all these heuristic specifications to the income support history does not increase R² much, which is quite surprising because these are variables that economists always talk about in this literature when trying to talk about income support payments and over-reliance on welfare dependency. Also, adding geographical information didn't do much. And the actuarial model, which is, again, it's just a proxy of what the government is doing, but I think it's a good proxy. That's where it's very low, which they may decide to focus on these people for policy reasons because they want to help young people. But I think it's worth emphasizing that if you focus only on this subpopulation, you're losing a lot of people who are ending up on income support payments for a long time. And so in terms of government cost, budget cost can be quite substantial, and you're also not providing support to a lot of people who are end up relying on these payments for a long period. Machine learning instead, in this context, does lead to improvements. It doesn't really matter which algorithm you use, you always get very similar R², which ex ante, it was not clear because they really use different methodology. Yes?
Sorry, so if I understand it right, you have OLS models with different numbers of independent variables. Is true. So maybe I missed it, but why are you using R² and not just R²?
Yeah, we could use the adjusted R squared. Yeah, no. I mean, we could use it. I mean, to be honest, the main thing that people use is the mean squared error. For interpretability, I also added the R squared, but obviously, yes, we could add the adjusted R squared. Since the number of predictors, aside from machine learning, is much smaller compared to the number of observations, you will get very similar results. Yes.
Is there a risk of the counterfactual with the actuarial? I mean, the counter argument they could put is it works brilliantly because we can see we pay this money, and the R squared for then going on to having serious dependency on income is very low, so that you don't have the other data where this isn't going on.
Oh, okay, I see your point. So actually, this is before the government implemented this technique. So they started in 2019 with this try, test, and learn. So
they didn't have any support for parents or child support.
I mean, they did, but it was not. They didn't have this screening program targeted toward this very subpopulation. But I can double check if there was any other specific support for these people. Thank you. Now, in terms of magnitude, is it meaningful improvements? Now, if you compare model 1, the one with just a constant, to model 13, you see that the mean square error is 1/4 of the mean square error in model 1. And if you think, okay, maybe I can just use a very simple model with the income support history, as I said, model 5 already has a very high R squared. But still going from model 5 to model 13, the mean squared error still drops by almost 50%, 42%. And the confidence interval do not overlap. So it means that you are losing valuable information by focusing only on past income support history. And that information is there. You just have to use it. And even if you compare model 8, which is the model, the simple OLS model with the highest R squared with the machine learning model, you have an increase of 14 percentage points in the R squared, and also the mean squared error decreases substantially. So it's a substantial improvement in prediction performance, which means that you are able with these algorithms to predict, to identify more people at risk of accumulating a large welfare cost over their lifetime, or at least in these 4 years. So if you manage to help them, it can lead to large government savings. Now, this is because everyone always asks, okay, what are the top predictors selected by these algorithms? In the paper, we have both the table for the top one predicted by boosting, the top one predicted by Lasso. There is a lot of overlappings. Some of them are things that you will expect, such as past history of receiving income support payments, but others are not so obvious. And quite interestingly, if you put these variables into an OLS model, you get very high performance, not as high as 76%, but if you really get a policymaker who hates machine learning and doesn't want to run these algorithms before giving the prediction to caseworkers, then just running an OLS model with the top predictors could be a good compromise. Or if they don't have the capability to run machine learning. We do also a lot of extensions. We are working on that also based on referee feedback. I'm happy to talk about them during the Q&A, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one because I want to show you that for unemployment benefits, when we are trying to predict unemployment, here actually the heuristic model plus the location plus the income support history does quite well. The R squared of model 8 is quite high, which in a way means that economists are quite good at predicting who is going to be on unemployment. Last saw, machine learning does lead to small improvements, but not huge improvements. However, it's still a 3 percentage point increase, which you may think that is not much, but remember again that the cost of implementing this technique is 0. So I would argue that even in this case, it may be worth implementing these techniques. So I think I'm okay with time. To conclude, I hope I convinced you that machine learning can be used and should be used in this context with this data in order to predict long-term welfare dependency. And I would also like to conclude with 2 caveats, which I think it's always important to emphasize, is that I see machine learning as a complement both to human expertise and to causal inference. I'm not saying that machine learning should substitute caseworker expertise. I think this should be a complement. Caseworkers, social workers, frontline workers may use their expertise together with this prediction. This is something that is used, for instance, in the US, where they're starting to give judges some prediction based on algorithms, and then the judges can decide how to use these predictions. And similarly, in this case, you can provide this prediction to caseworkers, and then the human expert can decide how to use this prediction based also on their own expertise. And when I present this in front of economic audiences, I also like to emphasize that I'm not saying that everything we learn in econometrics, in statistics, it's useless. I'm just saying that machine learning is an additional tool that you can use together with randomized control trial, difference in difference, RDD, and so on. And it can be used, and it is being used to enhance these techniques, especially, for instance, when doing heterogeneity analysis and trying to understand which treatment works better for which people. And essentially, that's all I have. If you want to know more about this literature, I also have a web page dedicated to that. And that's all I have. So thank you. And I should say thank you, Oliver, again for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks, Dario. Actually, if you don't mind, a little late because I'm very excited you jumped right in, but a little late is that I wanted to introduce you. So this is Dario. You have heard from me already. I'm afraid I can't do a full introduction now, although all of you should check out his website, not just because Dario is an excellent economist and has spent time at Exeter, but also beforehand at Vanderbilt and Georgetown University. I'm very excited to have him, but also because you just mentioned at the end, and I think that's really, really worth mentioning, you have an entire section on your website dedicated to machine learning, especially for economists. If you want to learn more about these techniques and you're not familiar with them, then I think I would definitely recommend that. But thank you, first of all, for taking part today and starting us off in this seminar series, because the IDSAI has many more seminar speakers coming, but I'm excited at this one and that you, Dario, are the first one to speak. So I know we're going into questions now. Since I can't see anybody except for Dario on this little stream, I'm actually not sure how many. Hello, hi, someone's waving. I'm hoping, oh, that's excellent. There's a microphone, thank you. I was going to start it off with one question, if that's all right, and then I'm going to hand over to Dario to actually do the rest of the questions, which is, Dario, obviously fantastic work and very exciting, just also to compare sort of the OLS strategy, the more sort of informed from economic theory informed one, and then finally the machine learning one. Obviously, the thing that I'm sure you've had to discuss, and I'd love if you have any thoughts to share them with us, is to what extent should we start to think about the ethics behind using this much data? We use it normally in economics. Data scientists often have access to much, but it's obviously quite impressive that you have about 1,800 more variables. At what point should we worry that it's too much, even though we could probably deal with it computationally? Is there any limits, do you think?
Yes, okay. I guess I can start with him and then we can take any other question. Before answering that question about the website, it's quite funny that I can check how many people visit my webpage compared to the section of machine learning. The machine learning is way more visited than my research page. I help people at conferences knowing the web page, but not my own research. But I'm glad that students use that a lot. Regarding the ethics, you're absolutely right. We have a discussion in the paper about there are a lot of ethical issues in many fields about using these machine learning techniques. And I think it really depends from one context to the other. The thing that I don't like in this discussion is when people say, oh, we can just remove the sex variable or the race variable and just go with that. Because then there are a lot of variables which are correlated with those factors. And so just removing a sex variable will not solve the issue. And in many cases, like if there is systemic inequalities in the data, then you end up with systemic discriminations in the machine learning, but that's because you have discrimination reflected in the data. What I like to emphasize is that I always say it's easier to see whether an algorithm is discriminating and then to adjust the algorithms compared to measure whether a human expert is discriminating and then convince the human expert not to discriminate anymore. I think in that case, it's a lot more complicated and it's an advantage of machine learning. But also the other thing that I wanted to emphasize is that I think in this context specifically, by providing this prediction in a way, it could also help caseworker realize whether or not they have some conscious or unconscious bias. Maybe they were helping only some specific subpopulation compared to others. And also it's true that in some sector, in some area, if you get that indigenous people are more likely to get welfare dependency, to rely too much on welfare dependency may end up discriminating them. But in this specific case, if that means that then we provide more support to this population, may actually be a good thing. And so I agree with you that there are a lot of ethical issues, but I think there is a lot of nuances between machine learning is always bad and machine learning is always good. And it really depends on each context. Yes.